And I hear people making excuses for why someone who was born in one of the wealthiest countries in the world just can't do something because of systemic racism or oppression. It really puts bees in my bonnets. It really frustrates me because all I hear, to your point, are excuses, excuses, excuses.
Can we actually look at the reality of what's going on in our communities and stop buying into the narrative? Stop hiding behind history. And that goes for people in the United States, and that goes from people here as well.
Hello everyone, my name is Rogan and this is This Bahamian Gyal. On my platform I do social commentary and reaction videos. I encourage my audience to have private conversations in public. My guest today is Ada Akpala. She is a writer, she's a commentator, she's the head of content for the Equiano Project, which is a debate, discussion, and ideas forum. And it's over there that you'll find her weighing in on subjects of race and identity. And it is my pleasure to have her on my show today. Thank you so much for being here, Ada. Ada, it took us a while to get here, right?
It really did. I remember, I don't know who watched who first, but I think I must have seen one of your videos and I was like, dang, I want to speak to her one day. And I think one of us hit each other up on social media. So yeah, it's been a long time coming. I'm really happy to be here.
So for the audience today, we're going to chat about this movement that's afoot, as far as I'm concerned, to police Blackness. We'll talk about the state of the Black community and also what we can do to correct the behaviors in our community. And you'll also hear more about Ada's work and her personal experiences over the years. I'm sure there's a lot to talk about. But Ada, I want to start here. I want to start with a quote, okay? So this is a quote I saw recently that said, "The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it." Let me read that again. The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. And what I have seen over the years, I feel, is this movement to silence and ultimately erase the voices of Black people who refuse to label every single infraction that they encounter as racism or systemic oppression. And it's almost like critical thinking has just gone out of the window. People they don't stop to evaluate and question and challenge. They just accept and react and respond sometimes in the most vitriolic ways. And so many of them are forced to later come back and offer some sort of apology if they're decent people, but otherwise they just move right on to the next cause du jour. And so I want to start by asking, what is it that you think makes people engage in this groupthink where they just blindly accept everything that they hear versus somebody who will stop, particularly in the Black community, we're talking about the Black community, where they'll stop and question things and challenge things?
I think when you engage in groupthink, it's quite comforting, right? Because you remove that responsibility from yourself, like you mentioned, to critically assess situations or events and, come up with your own conclusion. That's one part. Another part is, sometimes I was actually thinking about it when I was thinking about this question, and I get asked this question over and over again.
I'm sure.
Why is it that a lot of Black people find themselves being policed or policing the thoughts and behaviors of others? And I've actually had a different thought. I think that Blackness itself, the concept of Blackness itself, once you believe in it and engage in it and really, in a sense, give your identity to it, it is self-policing. Because there are actually certain attributes of Blackness itself as an ideology that is actually very restrictive and quite limiting, right? So we know that Blackness, it's, there's two parts. One to do with your identity, those who are from African heritage, dark skin, certain phenotype that can, ascribe them to being Black, right? Racially or ethnically Black. But there's also that socio-political side of things. That's why there's always inconsistencies. We've seen this time and time again of who is actually Black, who is actually allowed to speak on so-called Black issues, who is apparent, who is, in the Black community and who isn't. And often you will find that those who are ethnically Black, phenotypically Black, if they have different views, if they have different ideas, if they approach things differently, let's not even talk about the psychological part of it. If they have different so-called habits, behaviors that are not typically Black, then their Black card is removed. They are no longer in the Black community. They can no longer speak on such issues because they don't have that shared experience. So I am finding now more and more that the concept of blackness itself is what is actually policing many people who really give themselves to that.
Well, who do you think it is who's in charge of determining who is able to or authorized to speak on behalf of the Black community? Because to me, I'm a part of the Black community. You're a part of the Black community. You have your own experiences that, were formed from you were a kid into adulthood. I have my own experiences. And, it always kind of baffles me because for a group that says we don't all think the same, we're not a monolith, they sure do act like a monolith sometimes, or there's a lot of tap, tap, tap if you step out of line. So who determines who is qualified or authorized to speak on behalf of the Black community?
Well, of course, I don't think that there's actually one person, that's, even though from time to time, we have these so-called Black leaders, but, it's not surprising that at the moment, let's say Black Americans are the ones that are driving a lot of these conversations, right? And it's really frustrating because, blackness, this concept of blackness, it's not treated or seen or approached the same around the world.
Correct.
But at the moment, Black Americans or Americans in general are driving these conversations on race. And sometimes that can lead to narrow ideas and narrow, conclusions. And when someone from a different part of the world, tries to chime in and say, actually, this is how I deal with, or I relate with, or don't relate with. Right? We have to remember that, it's so ironic that in the days of, self-ID and self-identity, it's like your race is always imputed on you, and it's not even something that you are allowed to actually navigate yourself. Should I mention the mixed race community and how difficult it is for them to constantly, both from the Black, both from the white community, so to speak, in terms of not knowing where to stand, in terms of not knowing who they even are, because they're constantly told, actually, you think like this, or you move like this, so you can't be in this community, or you can't be in that community. So, I wouldn't say that they're leaders, so to speak, but, Black Americans are the ones driving these conversations when it comes to blackness.
I absolutely agree with that, especially as a Caribbean woman living in the United States. I'm often told, particularly, and it happens mostly on my channel. I'm not going to lie, on my YouTube channel, that's where I get it a lot. Like, you don't speak for us. And I always have to remind people, I'm a Black person. At the end of the day, when I walk down the street, nobody knows I'm from the Caribbean. They don't know I'm from the Bahamas. They see a Black woman and that's it. And so whatever shared experience that you have today, I can't talk about the 50s. I wasn't around the 50s or the 60s. And I didn't grow up in America. I grew up in a predominantly Black country where our leaders, the millionaires, everybody who I saw was predominantly, they were Black people. So I have a different background, a different experience. I had no issue with non-Blacks. But at the end of the day in America, I am a Black woman and I'm going to have those same experiences that they do. And one of the things I also noticed is that, because I asked you the question, who has authority to speak for Black people? And I think because a lot of African Americans are driving these conversations, it seems that it's a leader, any leader who agrees with what they believe, or who panders to what they pander to, or what they agree with, or anyone who tells them basically what they want to hear. Because there are some excellent leaders out here who are speaking the truth, but they don't want to hear that because it doesn't feel right. It's uncomfortable. And it just goes against everything that they were taught or they believe or they just feel comforted by. So that's always a very tough thing. But I always have to remind my African-American audience, even though they get upset, is that you're not the only Black people in the world.
Yeah. And, just a quick point on that. Maybe leaders, in my opinion, is not the right word. Maybe, people who drive the conversation or people who are influencing that discourse and thought. And what I've noticed is that you don't even have to be Black and agree with the narrative or the rhetoric, so to speak. Even if you're white, I've said this a few times, right? White people aren't allowed in a conversation unless they agree with it. And not only can they be part of the conversation when they agree, they can even start to lead the conversations in many respects, the Robin DiAngelos and so on, right?
Correct.
So I think it's just very inconsistent. And it, like you mentioned, is very ideologically driven. You believe in the victimhood narrative. You believe in the politics of struggle and oppression, then you're on our side. If not, then, you're bowing or lap dancing to the so-called white man.
Oh, I've definitely heard you're a coon, you're a tether, you're a sellout. And I think the real sellout isn't somebody who is calling the Black community out on their BS. I think the real sellout is the person who just falls in line and watches the destruction and the implosion of our community and says nothing. That's the sellout in my estimation. And I like what you said about, the white voices, because even on my YouTube platform, one of the things I decided when I pivoted my content, Ada, was that I wanted it to be a space where people could feel free to talk, because I think that's what's missing today, is that we're not having the conversations. We're talking in our homes. We're talking with our friends behind closed doors. And we're saying certain things, but we're not talking to one another because we're so fearful that it's going to be received the wrong way. And anytime a person who identifies as white, I can only say identifies because I can't see them unless they have up an avatar. But when they say, listen, I'm a white male or I'm a white woman, and I agree with what you're saying, there's like this attack on those individuals. Like, you don't get to speak for us, or you don't get to speak on our behalf, or you don't get to criticize. And that's just not the way the world works. Whether they're criticizing you to your face or not, there's going to be criticism.
Exactly. And, you touched on, that people, when they're speaking on issues in the so-called Black community, and there are a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues that need addressing, right? And that's why I personally am not so interested in this thing called the Black community and so on, because I think Black communities, communities, are made up of homes, individual homes. Homes build communities, good communities build nations. Before we're stressing and worrying about a community, a global community at that, we need to focus on what's happening inside of many of our houses, right? The stats in the UK are pretty much similar to the stats in the US. 60%, I know the US is much more higher. 60% of but Black children are growing up in single parent homes, right? Our homes are not, are being fractured. Apart from, and every time I start talking about this, the usual talking points. Well, that's actually the reality of what's happening.
That's the reality.
That is the reality. You can be entitled to your own opinions. You can't be entitled to your own facts. That is the fact. And everything trickles down, right? We see from the homes, the destabilization of the homes comes the destabilization of our communities, and our surroundings, and everything links to each other. So I just think there's a little bit of lip service sometimes to, trying to resolve some of the so-called issues in the Black community, when there are bigger ones actually staring us right in the face.
But let me ask you this question. If you had to, because a lot of times we're so United States focused and centric. So I want to learn more about the UK, because you're in London.
I'm near London, so I'm not in London anymore. Yeah.
You're near London.
Too expensive.
Oh, I heard. So, but how would you assess the Black community, or, what is it getting right or what is it getting wrong right now where you live?
So where I live, it's a little bit less diverse than London, but I do think we have fairly similar issues in terms of the four main areas of sort of socioeconomic well-being. So in education, unfortunately, a lot of Black children are struggling, right? Being raised in single parent homes. Black Caribbeans especially are the highest rates, being raised in single parent families. In terms of, criminality and being in the criminal justice system, unfortunately, we are overrepresented there as well. Antisocial behavior, which is more a young people thing. But when it comes to those disparities, unfortunately, again, we're seeing Black people highly represented in that, right? Health outcomes as well. So I feel that there are a lot of issues that need addressing. Obviously, they're environmental, or we can say, when people say, there's systemic issues. But I think that more pertinent to that is the actual mindset and the choices that a lot of us make, right? In terms of, criminality and antisocial behavior. The stabbing rate, for example, in London is becoming almost a war zone, right? People are, And it's
I've
always,
heard.
for me, when I hear things like, poverty is what's causing these issues, or there aren't, in fact, I heard this even from an American politician. I think there's an epidemic in the US of looting and, going into stores and, right.
Of course. Stores.
Exactly.
Smash and
So
grabs.
we have, it's not as bad here, but there are incidents here and there. And it's still the same rhetoric, even whether it's here or whether it's in the US. And you have people saying, well, it's poverty. Okay. I'll talk about that in a second. Oh, they don't have enough youth centers. And I was just talking to my husband and I was like, so you want to tell me if these people have a youth center that they go to, they're not going to go into a store, climb on a counter, smash a window. Like, what is the difference? And in fact, when I was younger, youth centers became hotspots for violence, hotspots for gang violence, antisocial activity, because that was the point, all the gang members or your so-called ops were there, right? That was the easiest place to find everyone. So in fact, a lot of them got shut down. I remember, playing pool and a bit of table tennis, and it became also a hell zone, and they got shut down because staff were being abused. Girls were being abused by some of the boys that went there. So even the resources that we sometimes receive, we don't utilize it how it should be utilized. That's why I'm saying that a lot of these things aren't what we need to get from the government or politicians. It's actually, self-perpetrated. And I know people don't like to hear that, but that is the truth. So this point also it's about poverty, especially, there's some South Asian communities like the Bangladeshis, especially Muslim families where a lot of women don't work. I think here is about 60% of Muslim women are taking care of the home. They're not working. So automatically sort of that income level and, it's natural that, one person not having employment is going to lessen the income that's coming in the house.
Affect the household.
What they found is actually a lot of Bangladeshis are actually faring worse than a lot of Black Africans and, Black communities, Black Caribbeans.
Wow.
But the violence and the violent crime
But the violence isn't coming from there.
I think they did one in New York as well. And I think Chinese immigrants were doing way worse than Black Americans. But the violent, economically, they were doing, Chinese immigrants, they were doing way worse. And that was the study that they did in New York. And yet the violent crime doesn't match up.
But but to your point, it kind of, it shows that it's not an issue of poverty. It's about the behavior or the culture that's coming from our community. Because you have people, as you said, Bangladeshi, I don't know if you said Southern Asian, or no, you said Chinese immigrants
in New York
are economically faring worse, but that's not where the crime hotspots are. That's not the people who are primarily engaging in the crime.
And I'm just tired of the excuses. As I started this conversation, I was talking about Blackness itself almost as a living entity and having these attributes. And one of the things I see is that, this concept of Blackness can be excuses driven. I watched one of your videos actually, and you were talking about this people going into Walmart and Walmart leaving some areas because of the crime and things are boarded up, and that happens here as well. Black cosmetics are sometimes boarded up and things like that. And you said something that I have always said, and you mentioned you can understand someone going in to steal bread, right? I was in a store once and a lady, I believe she was Roma, Eastern European, and she was shoplifting, but all that was in her bags were bread and water and I think nappies. And what happened is that people were actually against the security guard because they could see that this woman was almost humiliating herself. But what I'm seeing with a lot of young people, also Black people as well, there was a viral video that was on TikTok or Instagram, and it was a young Black man, or youngish, and he was in the Apple store stealing fake phones. And he's like,
Apple.
So with all due, and it's not a humiliation for them, it's almost a glory, it's a pride. It's like, I'm doing it, what are you going to do? And what? That's why they video themselves. I didn't see that woman videoing herself laughing and she was embarrassed. So that is the difference. I don't buy that violent crime causes poverty.
Or the poverty causes violent crime.
That's what I'm
poverty
say,
causes
So I don't agree
crime.
that poverty causes violent crime. I actually believe it's the other way around. Now, when you engage in economic crime, right, like in many parts of Nigeria that are ridden with poverty, one of the main crimes there is kidnapping, right? They kidnap someone for the ransom, you know, to get the money and so on. So not that I understand, but that makes more sense. But I watched a video, or I commented on a video of a man stamping the skull of another young man, just stamping him to death.
For what?
Just stamping him, throwing bins at him and things like that. And I made a comment about it, and one of my friends messaged me and said, don't you know that these are to do with poverty and things like that? And I said, how does that help him economically, right? And I'm just sick and tired of these things. One has nothing actually to do with the other, but you see these same buzzwords come up when you're talking about black people and blackness, and no one questions it. Oh, it's crime ridden because of poverty. Oh, we must be that. And no one talks or explores more the differences of, like I mentioned, other groups who are in the same and even worse situations. Why is it that immigrants come from real destitute parts of the world and excel even above, you know, the so-called dominant white majority group? Why aren't we asking these questions? We know why.
Right. You know, yeah, we do know why. And it's your point, like it's the same old rhetoric, it's the same old talking point, it's the same old excuses. And it really gets me so frustrated. It gets me frustrated because we're dealing with a scenario. The UK and America are some of the richest. I mean, the countries in the UK and the United States of America are rich places. You're dealing with immigrants, for example. Let's think about an immigrant who's coming into the United States from Haiti, where it's a real life or death situation for many of them, where they're forced to eat mud pies to stave off starvation. And so when I see people in that scenario and those individuals are willing to work whatever jobs, do whatever it takes, but they want to make a contribution to society. And I hear people making excuses for why someone who was born in one of the wealthiest countries in the world just can't do something because of systemic racism or oppression. It really puts bees in my bonnets. It really frustrates me because all I hear, to your point, are excuses, excuses, excuses.
Stop with your excuses. Stop saying, unfortunately, and I'm going to say this respectfully, black people, stop saying I'm black and the system wasn't made for me. The greatest enemy to your success, to our success, is our excuse. What's our excuse? Whatever we say. I'm black, or, you know, I didn't grow up with two parents, or I'm a single mom, or I'm a single dad. I'm not saying none of this stuff is factual. Let's be real. Racism is still irrelevant in today's day and time, unfortunately. You know, being a single parent is definitely hard, right? But I don't give room to the enemy.
Well, we've got no time for excuses. Not because the bitter legacy of slavery and segregation have vanished entirely, they have not. It's just that in today's hyper-connected, hyper-competitive world with millions of young people from China and India and Brazil, many of whom started with a whole lot less than all of you did, all of them entering the global workforce alongside you, nobody is going to give you anything that you have not earned. Nobody cares how tough your upbringing was. Nobody cares if you suffered some discrimination. You have to remember that whatever you've gone through, it pales in comparison to the hardships previous generations endured, and they overcame them. And if they overcame them, you can overcome them too.
And it's like we take comfort in these excuses. And anytime someone speaks up and says, listen, and I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, because poverty is real. Everybody's situation is different. And I certainly understand that everybody can't do the same thing, can't achieve the same thing. I get that. But I also don't make excuses for people just because they had a tough time in life. Because plenty of people had a tough time in life and they made something of themselves. So it really bothers me. And when I talk about our leaders, I'm talking about our I don't want to use the word grifters, but you have a lot of societal leaders or civil rights leaders, even though we've already post-civil rights, but still coming to the fore and giving the same speech that they gave back in the 50s and 60s in 2024, still telling people that the reason why you're in this position is because of racism. The reason why is because the white man is against you. Where? You're living in one of the richest countries in the world. What's stopping you from changing your life?
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because, interesting and ironic, because or a lot of Black people claim, Black power, and we're powerful, and, we are the progenitors of humanity, the first, we're so capable. And yet it's almost like we're not capable, even if it's to pull ourselves up by the bootstrings, right? I really admire someone called King Randall, and he's a person, I don't know if you've seen him around or if you've seen his work. And he's basically a 21-year-old Black man. And he started a school for young Black boys to teach them, how to be good members of society and to be, good future fathers, good politicians in the future, if that's what they want to do, skilled, engaging in skilled trade. And his motto is do for self. What can I do for self? How can I stop relying on the government? And, he's ridiculed by many people on the left. He's completely ridiculed. He was called an idiot, by famous commentators. And it makes me think, I'm saying all that to say, we claim Black power, but what is more powerful than that? What is more impressive? Someone as young as he is, building a school,
early 20s.
Building a school, defines the stereotypes that we claim to be so tired of being put in these boxes. And yet he's ridiculed because he's a conservative, because he doesn't, believe that political power is the only way, to achieve economic power. He believes in these other things, as someone like Booker T. Washington, right? That kind of school of thought, that kind of mindset, go in trade, work, build in that way. And he's ridiculed. And something that, this one-sidedness sometimes, I'm more of the King Randall, Booker T. Washington side, but I understand people believe in different ways to achieve, social equity and all these things. But sometimes there's a one-sidedness that comes from people in the so-called left, or comes from people who believe in this so-called struggle narrative, that the only way is through political power. The only way is through, having whites simmer down a little bit, and everything is centered, ironically, around whiteness in a weird way. So I just find it very regressive and counterproductive, some of the way that we navigate some things.
I want to talk about an interview that you did with Adam Coleman. I don't know if you remember this, but you talked about the dangers of demonizing certain groups. And you said it would come to a point, and I think it's already come to that point, where you'd start to see a lot of pushback from those groups. I think I've already seen it as it relates to, let's just talk about like the LGBTQIA plus community, where a lot of them at some point in time, and I've talked about this extensively on my channel too, where they were quick to call you all of these names, label you transphobic, homophobic, if you had even the slightest criticism of them. And now we see this pushback from people who are like, I don't care what you label me, I don't care what you say. And it's almost it's like they're being met with the same amount of vitriol now, because people are so sick and tired of their slight criticisms being interpreted as something that could potentially destroy their careers, destroy their lives. So I wanted to know if you would just elaborate a little bit on that, because like I said, I think we're already starting to see the pushback as relates to blacks and whites.
I can't believe I said that then. That interview was like 2-3 years ago. I think so. And I can't believe, and that's exactly.
Yeah. I thought it was really poignant.
I can't believe I said that then, because I thought I've been saying that recently as well. So it's interesting. But yeah, definitely. I'm already, if you're on Twitter, I see a lot of the racism that's even coming back against Black people. And, some of the disgusting actual, epithets that people are spewing, because they're like, you've called me racist for 3 years. Fine, I'll play your game, because I'm sick to death. I'm sick to death of that. And, another thing is that a lot of these false claims of racism as well that have been happening, right, recently, is also contributing to that as well. We saw recently, I don't know if you saw the viral video of frat boys, apparently making monkey noises at a Black woman and calling her Lizzo. think it was a Palestinian American first or Israel first, I don't know, protest. And the black woman was on the Palestinian side. She was very big, very, very big. And apparently, you know, in a 1 second clip, you could see a white man doing this. And what was interesting is
monkey gestures.
And some people were saying, well, it wasn't done because she was black, and it was done more because of her weight, and she apparently looked like a gorilla. That's what people were saying. But the other point that I was seeing is that a lot of people just didn't care. The amount of white people with big accounts, small accounts, I wish I can save them all because I want to talk about this more one day, that actually said, yeah, maybe it was racist. We don't give a crap. We don't care. We don't care. Maybe it was. And that's the first time I have seen that on a mass scale of a lot of people saying, yeah, it was racist, and it was racist and funny. I'm not talking troll accounts. I'm not talking bots. I'm talking people with their faces, big accounts, small accounts, and so on. And I started to think, well, a few days or weeks ago, we had that guy from Baltimore making a stupid, fabricated claim of racism, right? So can you see?
Yes, I saw that one.
People aren't taking it seriously anymore. We've cried, not me, you know, I didn't play that game, but a lot of people cried wolf so many times. And we have been saying, stop it. Stop telling white people that they're this, they're oppressive, they're the original, you know, destroyers and the only reason for all human suffering, the past and present. Stop making these stupid false claims of racism, because one day people aren't going to care. And that's exactly what is happening now. The vitriol is here, and it has come full force. And sometimes it even makes me, you know, I never used to care what I say, and actually I still don't, but I have to now think, okay, I don't actually want to say something that's actually going to embolden these racists that, in my opinion, have been born from this nonsense that has been pushed since 2020. Racists were born, Ro. Racists were born in this time, and that's what we were saying, or reborn, shall I say, because they've had enough. People have had enough.
They've had enough. Well, that's what happens when it's like, there's this analogy about, you know, a bunch of people inside of the hospital in hospital beds with paper cuts. And so there isn't enough beds for the people who have real gunshot wounds, because we spend so much time picking apart people and saying that this is racist and that is racist, when somebody might just have a genuine criticism of you. Somebody might be a douche bag. Sorry to say it like that. They might just be a rotten person, but that doesn't necessarily make them racist. And we really do need to stop this. And the minute you have this conversation with some people, and it's not all, because I know, and I have to always be careful, because I know that there are a lot of Black people, I speak to them every day on my channel, I speak to them in person, who are also sickened by a lot of the things that are going on in the community, and that same sort of speech that everything is racist, they don't subscribe to that at all. So, you know, I always have to be very careful not to paint everybody with the same brush, because there are people who are in the Black community who are sick of it, just like there are people in the LGBTQIA plus community who are sick about what the activists and all these other folks are doing. So I totally get that. One of the things I wanted to talk about too is because a lot of times we hear people say, oh, you're saying the same narrative over and over again. It's the same criticism of the Black community. Oh, what's new? The same thing. You don't have any solutions. And my first thing is, we have so many people who are in denial, Ada. So many people in denial about where we are as a community that it warrants repetition to get the point home. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, solutions to our problems don't come from one person. It doesn't just come from Ada. It doesn't come from Ro. It doesn't come from the president. It doesn't come from just one source. It has to be where everybody is putting their input in to figure out how we can resolve the issues that we have. Then there are some things that can be resolved. I mean, it's just common sense. So if you have a kid who is doing poorly in school, and the reason they're doing poorly in school is not because they have a learning disability, but because they just aren't applying themselves. They're not studying. They're playing basketball. They're playing video games, and they come home from school and they're not applying themselves, and they're getting bad grades. And I would think that the solution to that would be to put away the hobbies and focus more on your studies. If you have a lot of crime in your area, I would think that the solution would be for you to not create a safe haven for criminals in your own community, that you report them and you let them know that this is not the place where you're going to come to deal drugs, to sell guns, to do any of that stuff in my community. If you have litter in your area and you're seeing dirty mattresses outside, then I would think that the solution to that, you don't need a politician to tell you this, is to say, hey, you clean up after yourself, I clean up after myself, and we don't allow this in our community. I was in a mall parking lot 2.5 weeks ago, and I was about to get in my car when I saw a lady, she was black, emptying out the trash from her car into the parking lot, just pulling it out of her car and just throwing it on the floor. I have a big problem with litter, Ada. A huge problem. So I know the times that I'm living in, and I know people will, go nuts and curse you out and all that stuff. So you know what I did while she was there pulling all her garbage out? I walked up to her and I picked up the trash, and she jumped back because she didn't see me coming. I picked up the trash because the trash can was 10 feet away. So she couldn't even be bothered to take the trash from her car 10 feet away to the trash can. And then I saw her kind of watching me. She never said anything. But maybe a seed was planted that day, or maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe nothing happened. Maybe she would probably do it again in the future. But the solution to a lot of these problems are within our grasp. We don't need anybody else to do it for us or to tell us what to do. And I'm so sick of the excuses. I don't know how you feel about all of this, though. You can definitely weigh in.
I feel exactly the same, because I'm a person that believes that the power is within yourself, especially when it comes to your own life, right? I am from that background, fortunately, not just from where I was born, which was Nigeria. And, if you don't work, you don't eat. Mm-hmm. If you misbehave, you don't eat. There's no, benefits. There's no welfare. If you don't work, it doesn't matter about the history. It doesn't matter about your government. You ain't going to eat, right? So I'm from that kind of background, but also in terms of my own family, my own community, right? We are a no excuses driven community. Mm-hmm. And I've watched, every single member of my family excel wherever they are. I have family in Nigeria and they're excelling. I have family in your country, in the US, or your second home, shall I say, or if I don't I don't have any in the Caribbean.
I guess it's home now too.
And they're doing well. They don't relate, even though they've lived in America. Some now even born there, right? Second generation. They don't even relate to that. I have family here and I'm here as well. And we're all doing okay. So I think, when you're talking about solutions, there are a few ideas that I have. But I think one of the main ones that I want to speak about is we have to actually look at reality. We have to actually see what is going on. And stop buying into the narrative or stop living by the narrative. Are the police really the biggest threat to your boys, to your young boys? Or is it, especially in the UK, the chance of you being killed by a police officer is in the 0%. But the chance of you being stabbed by another young black boy is you're 24 times likely to be stabbed than a young white boy. So why is it that the narrative, when, for example, a young man called Chris Cabba was killed, and I don't agree with a lot of things that happened, and how the police dealt with that and so on. But is that really the narrative? Is that really the issue? One man, and that's now your issue that you want to come together for. And between then and now, how many I'm talking young boys for no reason at all. So can we actually look at the reality of what's going on in our communities and stop buying into the narrative, stop hiding behind history? And that goes for people in the United States, and that goes from people here as well. Look, a lot of bad things happened, you're right? They happened to black people. They've happened to everyone, but let's focus on black people, because I don't want to do the whole they've happened to everyone. Fine, let's do that. They've happened to black people, but a lot of the issues that we're seeing now doesn't come from that, especially if, immediately after those situations, we were seeing black people thrive in probably worse conditions that there are now. So you can't tell me that the issues that you know, the Black community is facing today is a direct cause, as people always want to try and link, you know, this causation to the slavery that happened, the colonization and things like that. There are more things that we need to be having conversations about now. And the more important thing for me personally, the surest way I think that we can have better conversations at least is that we need to separate Blackness a bit.
If you enjoyed this interview today, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, and leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Everybody is welcome to participate in this conversation. Also, be sure to follow Ada. Everything is going to be linked down below here and in the description box. She is such a wonderful resource. And I thank you once again, Ada, for being a part of my platform today. And I hope that it opens some minds across the spectrum, across the races, across the ethnicities. So thank you so much, Ada. And I will see you all next week, Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And if you like videos like this, please don't forget to watch my playlist, and you can watch more videos right here and right here. I'll see you next week. Bye. Mwah.
You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry.